What is up, freaks? It's your boy Marty Bent here to introduce this week's episode of Tales from the Crypt. I had the immense pleasure of sitting down with Dan Tapiero from DTAP Capital and Bullion International last week to get his views on Bitcoin, how he sort of came around to it, why he thinks it's already established, how Wall Street's viewing it, and how Bitcoin compares to the values of the Founding Fathers. A very good conversation. I think if you take one nugget from this episode, it should be that people need to think critically more. We need more critical thought in this world. It's something that is lacking. A lot of people are allocating decision-making to thought leaders, if you will. And it's high time that we get more logical thinkers in this world, more critical thinkers, excuse me. This week's episode of Tales from the Crypt is brought to you by the Cash App. As you know, Cash App is the simplest way to send and save money. And now it's the simplest way to try to grow your money. Introducing Cash App Investing. We're stacking, what are we doing? We're stacking slivers of stocks, slivers of shares. We're selling slivers of shares in the Seychelles. We're selling slivers of shells in the Seychelles. Not really. We're doing it in America. So if you have Cash App, they have Cash App Investing right now. And unlike investing tools that only let you buy entire shares of a stock, Cash App lets you instantly invest as little or as much as you want. So again, you can buy a sliver of a share. This way, when your favorite company's stock is just a little bit too expensive, you can always own a little piece at as little as $1. And as Cash App is directly connected to your bank account, there are no 4 to 5 day waiting periods for inbound transfers. You can start investing that money right away, baby. Get on it. You can start stacking sats right away, too. Brokerage services are provided by Cash App Investing, a subsidiary of Square, and member SIPC. As always, when you sign up, use the code STACKINGSATS. That's one word. You're now going to get $10 when you sign up for the Cash App using the code STACKINGSATS, and they're going to give $10 to Owls Lacrosse. That's Owls Lacrosse. Woo, woo. And, of course, they still have all the Bitcoin goodness. You can buy, sell Bitcoin, send it to a personal wallet, from personal wallet to the app, send it straight to a CoinJoin if you want. So go download the Cash App from the App Store or the Google Play Store today. Use the code STACKINGSATS. This episode is also brought to you by our good friends at Casa Freaks. How confident are you in your key security? How protected is your seed phrase? Does your key setup have a single point of failure? Are you even asking yourself these questions? Are you? Our friends at Casa have drummed up one of the smartest and most secure ways to hodl your Bitcoin. No KYC, no altcoin, no percentage fees on your Bitcoin. No one standing between you and your keys. Get that peace of mind for your stash with one of the most secure multi-sig setups in the world. Use the promo code TFTC to get up to $250 off your Casa membership, or hit them up directly with an email. Just straight up email them, membership@team.casa. Ask them the hard questions. Yo, what can you do with this product? How are you going to help me? Can I get a demo? What about this? What about that? Ask them your hardest OPSEC questions. All memberships come with a full set of hardware wallets and for your multi-sig, plus the Casa Node 2, plus Faraday bags, and early access to all future Casa products. If you're a serious hodler in a Diamond and Platinum membership package, you're going to get 24/7 VIP service, dedicated client advisor, and a custom onboarding and OPSEC plan. So again, use the code TFTC to get up to $250 off. Either email them at membership@team.casa or just go check out the multi-sig at keys.casa/keymasters. Freaks. Hope you guys enjoy this episode. I know I had an immense pleasure sitting down with Dan. He's got a wealth of knowledge, and I'm really glad to have him on the Bitcoin team. So enjoy.
Tales from the Crypt.
Good.
What is up, freaks? Welcome back to Tales from the Crypt. It's your boy Marty Bent here. What is it, Wednesday? On a Wednesday afternoon in Williamsburg, New York, sitting down with a guest I'm very excited to speak with today. He took the trip over to Williamsburg. Doesn't come over here often. I'm very appreciative of the trek that he made. I'd like to introduce you freaks to Dan Tapiero, co-founder of DTAP Capital and Bullion International. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Marty, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on.
Yep.
Again, thank you for making the trek. I know I don't make it over to Brooklyn often. You got beef with Brooklyn?
No, I'm in Greenwich in the city, but no, it's beautiful here. It's beautiful, and I'm sure it's a lot of fun too.
It is fun. And New York is fun. I have a big love-hate relationship with New York, but we're not here to talk about New York.
we were just chatting about Ray Dalio's note. You said you skimmed through it. This is something I want to really get into with you, is not necessarily the note that Ray wrote in particular, but the themes he talked about. And like we were just chatting about, these are themes we've been talking about for a while. So he basically came out to there are many factors that are at play here. You have pension and healthcare crises on the horizon with demographic shifts. You have debt-fueled economy and easy money asset bubbles everywhere. And I noticed you were talking about WeWork maybe being an end-of-cycle sort of tremor earlier this week. I think just from a macro perspective, do you think Ray is accurate in his description?
Well, I think he's sort of been on this theme for a little while. I mean, he published something, I don't know if it was 6 months ago or another missive on LinkedIn. And he's had this framework for a few years. The fund seems to navigate relatively well. His fund, even in periods where that framework is not operative. So, this may be a big picture concern, not clear how he's positioned exactly. Except I do know he's been quite public about this. He has about 10% of his portfolio in gold, which for the institutional money management world is quite big and is a statement. So, for people who are out there saying, well, is Ray really investing this way? Again, I don't know what his exposures are generally, but to have a 10% weighting in gold, I think is a statement that he is playing, that idea is in his portfolio.
Yeah, especially at the AUM that he's operating with too.
Yeah, that's quite a position.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you're a big gold guy. Let's sort of get into your path towards gold. Why you like gold and how you had this epiphany with Bitcoin recently, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a lot to unpack there in a way, but just to go back for a second on the Ray piece, I think that that framework can be the right one, but it may not be super operative at this moment. You could be in a situation where, and I've said this a little bit recently on Twitter and then also on Real Vision, which we mentioned, that I think this cycle, unlike anyone I've ever seen, is dominated by the president, and we've never really had this before. It's almost I guess they call it direct democracy, and he's tweeting his opinions and people are tweeting them back, and so. I see his ability to influence, and I just don't see how he's going to put himself in a position to lose this election. And part of that, based on the way that he's been managing things, is to have the stock market right up on the highs right into the election. So, if you start with that thought that he will, I don't want to say it's not manipulate the news, but he will, he will make sure that the macro backdrop is favorable for the market. You could have a situation like the one Ray describes be postponed for, perhaps after the election, maybe, or maybe further into the future, because Trump, as we've seen, he's had quite good success. The market is at an all-time high.
He was telling everybody to go take their profits and spend wisely the other day.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Well, so then, you know what? Then maybe he's going to come out and say no deal with China, and the market drops down 10%, and then he comes out and he says, oh, well, actually, we will have a deal and we will have more fiscal stimulus. I'm going to cut taxes or whatever, whatever. He's definitely watching this market like no president in the history of the country. Yeah, and he's, I don't want to say he's trading it, but in a way he is.
It's like he's trying to manipulate algos with his tweets, right? Because they'll just take words in either speeches or tweets that he puts out there and move markets with it, essentially, right?
Well, I don't know that it's a day for day, tick for tick thing. Like he comes in and he's like, the market's falling, I'm going to come in with something. I don't know that it's that specific, but he's definitely aware of where it is, and I think he releases data points, positive and negative, based on where the market is, which is totally crazy in a way, but it's been relatively effective.
Yeah, and Howard Marks wrote a letter a couple weeks ago that actually hit on this as well, because he's in a rock and a hard place, right? Because you have EU, you have the banking sector, and the ECB going negative, everybody going negative against the dollar. So everybody's pouring in the dollar to make the dollar stronger. At the same time, Trump's screaming at Powell to lower interest rates. And do you see a scenario in which wow, it's actually funny, there was a Freudian slip there. The Fed follows other central banks below the x-axis?
Yeah, I mean,
just because they're forced to, because
see, that's also a longer term issue, meaning that at the moment the Fed has cut and they've paused, and the payroll number that came out recently was okay. I think a lot of the data globally has been soft and softening as a result of previous Fed hikes, and also the tension between China and the U.S. I think has had a lot of business people and corporations holding off on investment plans and maybe rejiggering their supply chains to move out of China. Just, there's been disruption. So, macro is a medium term. For macro investing, macro trading to be effective, you have to have a medium term outlook. And so, unless you're going to trade, day to day kind of thing, and there are people who do that. But, I think there is a scenario, certainly under the Ray Dalio view, but there is a scenario where they have to keep cutting rates. But it could be pushed off again for a few more months. If I'm right about Trump and the market into the election, it's probably, the economy will stay okay enough and the market will be okay enough. So it may not happen for a year or two, but if you're saying to me, is it possible, can we get down to 50 basis points or closer to zero on the Fed funds rate? I would say yes. And, medium term, the thing that's been driving this is that there's just no inflation at all. And in fact, inflation has been dropping and is very low. So what is actually going to get prices to start increasing? We had this whole upcycle in the last few years, and the Fed was raising rates from zero, and they still didn't hit their inflation target. So from my perspective, a lot of those rate rises were not needed. And I think that's what Trump, no matter what you think about the guy or his character or whatever it is, he was right on last year when the Fed raised, for the last time and shouldn't have. And then, of course, in December, we had a total meltdown in the stock market. But, we never hit their inflation target. They were not supposed to raise that much. And so once again, they've stopped what may have been an upcycle by hiking too much, and the Fed does that often. And I think it wasn't the absolute level. I mean, this is all history, and I don't know how interesting or not, but it was the rate of change. They went from 0 to 2 in an 18-month period or whatever it was, a short period of time. So it was that was more of the break than, that it was 2%, which is not that much.
Yeah, but what does that say about I don't want to say the validity of the system, but like the structural foundation of the system, if it can be manipulated by tweets from Trump, and he's not, his mindset isn't to do what's best for the economy of the country in general. It's basically to get the stock market to a place where he can get reelected.
No, but that's okay. I mean, because he he does believe in that feedback loop, and as do, old time hedge fund guys like me and other investors. It is positive. The market goes up 20%, people feel better than when it's down 20%. And that's maybe very simplistic, but it's true. But I think that goes back to the Dalio question, because the underlying structure of the world, let's just call it monetary system, is problematic. It does, $17 trillion of debt is negative yielding. And Ray goes on about this, and it's never happened before. We've never seen it. It is a problem, and it's driven, I think, partly by structural deflation out of Europe, which started a long time ago with the initially the ERM crisis in the early 90s, but then the coming together of the currencies was super deflationary in 2000 into the euro, because you straitjacketed a lot of these countries into a fixed exchange rate, and you've prevented them from fiscally expanding. And now we've had discussion about, well, can we expand fiscally in Europe? And the Germans at one point say yes, and then they say no, but then, it's very hard to see Germany as or from the elites who are managing policy, very hard to see them actually agreeing that it's okay to expand fiscally beyond the limit. And I think you might even need like a new generation before that becomes okay.
Well,
so I just wanted to answer your point. I do think the underpinnings right now are problematic.
Yeah, because that's what Paranoid Bull Dal said when he was on this podcast a few months ago. Is that actually in the ECB, it's getting to the point. In Europe, it's getting to the point where the ECB may not legally be able to buy more German bonds because of
right.
They have portfolio limits on how much sovereign debt they can buy. So they're buying up so much, they're hitting the limits. Will they extend those limits? Who knows? But it does seem like something's afoot here, at least, and that's why I'm fascinated with Bitcoin. When I was an analyst at the fund I was working for, I was tasked with following tea leaves, central bank tea leaves, and writing commentaries on why the fund performed against currency market movements.
Did it say is, or did they say the?
Exactly, and I was one of those tea leaf hawks for a few years there. And after a few years, I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And at the same time, I was falling into Bitcoin. And so I'm a believer in Bitcoin, that Bitcoin can at least help provide a transitionary parallel system if the incumbent system that we're used to is rickety at its foundation. Do you think that Bitcoin can grow into a parallel and then
I think
dominant
it is,
system?
Yeah, I think it is growing into that now. I think it's interesting. Bitcoin, and I've said this before, is just so many different things. But in the first 5 or 6 years of its existence, I would not have thought that, even with it growing, I would not have thought that it could be. But now, when you look at the entire ecosystem of the value of the companies in the space, the equity value, plus the value of the tokens, plus the value of Bitcoin, and I know some people just only want to look absolutely only at Bitcoin. But if you look at the entire ecosystem, as I do as a macro guy, and looking at the value of that, the whole thing, you're looking at $350 to $400 billion worth of value, of dollars stuck there. Even if you adjust the valuation of some of the companies lower, it's still a huge number. And it's holding there. And interestingly, most people probably aren't aware of this, but the Bitcoin peaked and went down and is still down about 50% from the highs. But you have many companies in the space working on all sorts of different projects that have continued to grow, that have continued to make money through, a pretty harsh down cycle in Bitcoin, but much more harsh in the tokens. Some of them are down 98%, and a majority of them won't come back. But there are some projects that are valid. They're working on different things in the ecosystem that, I think will be supportive. I think you're going to have businesses grow up around the network. And I understand that the thing of greatest value is Bitcoin. But, if we're just going to say, okay, the Bitcoin network, greatest, as I've said, security truth machine that's ever been built, 10-year track record, hasn't been hacked. Who knows if that has ever existed before. The best track record of any asset in the history of the world, 10-year track record, 300% annualized. To me, it's proven itself. And the fact that even people in the space, some people and guys who I've spoken with in the last week or two who have been in for 7-8 years, still question whether, guy said to me, a well-known guy in the space said to me, he's still concerned about the code. And he knows a lot more than I do about that. But I thought, well, haven't we played that game already? Haven't we? So, hasn't that been traded? Hasn't that, we've survived, 100 near deaths, right? So it's almost like, so I think, there's huge value there, but also in all of the, intellectual talent, all the time that people put into the entire space, to me, I think is very valuable and not to be ignored. And I don't know if I'm sort of against this term, the shit coin that people use, because you've got geniuses who are working on some of these projects, and maybe those projects don't work, and maybe eventually everyone is just doing things related to Bitcoin, if that's what happens, but maybe not. And I don't think that takes away from Bitcoin. I just think that all of us who believe in Bitcoin, we really, adoption and understanding and education are the key things. And we don't at this stage want to be pushing people away because, they think it's fraudulent, or because, it's just filled with a bunch of 28-year-olds running around, who, those crazy millennial, whatever it is. We don't want to, I'm saying that's not a very good strategy if you're a Bitcoiner and you believe in, that this is one of the great inventions of the last, 100 years. If you believe that, then someone looking from the outside, and I think this is where, like, I see myself in this role a lot, explaining to guys like me who've been in the investment world for 30 years, who are older, this is what you're missing. And, and doing it in a legitimate way that they understand. That's, I think, what I'm bringing to the party at the moment, and having to explain, like, so why is there this group always yelling out at I just have to say, look, it's just a little bit of an alternative world there. They're, a bunch of young guys with a lot of energy.
Born on the internet, born in chat rooms, love to troll. I like Bitcoin Sign Guy's description of altcoins the best, that they provide cover for Bitcoin via confusion and people seeking out other ideas. If they have good ideas, it could be adopted by Bitcoin. But I too agree that, especially trying to educate outsiders, even though I do love participating in some of the schadenfreude when these altcoin projects do mess up, as outsiders looking in, maybe like, what the hell are these idiots talking about? But this is a great segue into the next question I wanted to ask you. What is it like pitching to others, like other men like yourself who are investing money? How are you finding success pitching it? Do you pitch it from different angles depending on who it is? Do you have many pitches when you go to it? Or?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a really, embryonic type of process, because I sort of fell down that rabbit hole pretty hardcore earlier in the year. And I mentioned in the Real Vision interview that the thing that really brought me to it was price, I have to say. I mean, as looking at lots of markets around the world, went down 85%, looks cheap. I liked it to begin with. start buying and you buy more and more, and then all of a sudden you have a significant position and you're really drawn into it. And I started finding things out about Bitcoin that I had no idea. I mean, I just hadn't done that deep dive. And so my process is, all right, this is really big. And in my career, I've done this several times before. In 2006, I got the idea that we were going to have a massive bull market in agriculture. And I went from trading currencies and bonds like almost overnight to moving all my analysts from their areas, emerging markets, currencies, bonds, like everyone into ag. And within 3 months, we were limit long in corn, soy, and wheat, and we'd published 8-page pieces explaining why, this was in late 06 and then 07, why we thought prices were going to double. And then when I was working with Stan Druckenmiller at Duquesne, he and I launched a farmland REIT together with other partners as well that ended up becoming AgCoa, which became probably the largest private farmland REIT in the United States. Mm-hmm. And so I remember speaking, I'll get back to your question, but I remember speaking to, some of the established older guys in the space saying to me, like, you're just some guy from Greenwich. What do you think what do you think you know about farmland?
Traders talking shit
What's
on
that?
you? CBOT traders talking shit on you?
Well, more like, the farmland, the 5 farmland aggregators in the space. And we had just come at it from a different perspective, and we built our own models, and we said, wow, this, we really want to own this. We want to aggregate a lot of land, because based on our models, it's trading at a 70% discount to where we think it's going to be worth in a few years. So my point is that sort of that, and I did the same thing with Gold Bullion International. It just, I had this concept. I wanted to own physical bars outside of the banking system, fully allocated in a specific way. And, we then built that, but I hadn't done that before. And so the sharp break for me from not sort of having fallen down the rabbit hole and then falling down, it was a process that I had gone through in other areas with other things before. So it wasn't, it wasn't, it's always uncomfortable in a way in the beginning, and then like the light bulb goes off. But I'd gone through that. And so in a way, I know how to explain that process, which I did on that interview, but also how to explain to other people who have a similar investment perspective. So what am I saying to them? I mean, I think, well, what is the bet? And I think there are only 2 bets in my mind, investments. Just long Bitcoin, very simple. Hold it in any wallet you want. I mean, preferably, in cold storage, but you can, I think that, an exchange like Coinbase for retail people, or, Kraken, or any of the top ones is okay. It's, so I think that's one bet. And then the other bet, I think, is a bet on the larger companies in the space who are going to be there, whether they're doing what they're doing now or whether they pivot. So in a sense, you're betting on some of the talent almost. You have a company with 1,000 people that's well organized, that's making money in the sector. As a macro guy, I want to have a sector bet as well. And that can take a bunch of different forms, not early stage VC type stuff. I'm not qualified to make a bet on that. And you have very well known VCs in the Valley, Andreessen and Dan Moorhead, et cetera. They have real expertise there. And again, I think we want to include that and talk about it as the ecosystem, because that talent pool is very valuable. And whether you think 10 years from now it's just Bitcoin or not, they will help the process.
It'll help achieve a tipping point, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And we don't want to, we don't want to push them away. It's already very hard to explain to people what Bitcoin is and why it's something that's going to be a part of everybody's future. And so if you get that far and you're able to put it in terms that older guys can understand, you don't want to create the uncertainty or extra complexity or the possibility of all these questions like shitcoin, what is that, and are those guys kidding, and you know what I'm saying.
No, I know exactly what you're saying, and as somebody who's definitely been one of the people attributing to that noise in the past, I think to come to the defense of Bitcoiners and their viewpoint is that they've seen so many people get scammed throughout the years just because it's so easy with this open source technology.
But that's the past.
Yeah. No, and I am, and I also want to make it clear that I am somebody who's confident in Bitcoin's long-term success. That I think that yes, it is okay in certain instances. I mean, it is good to warn people about scams that happen, and we just have to resign. We have to resign ourselves to the fact that people are gonna have to touch the stove first, and it's gonna happen. I touched the stove many times before I figured out what was going on with Bitcoin.
I haven't yet. I mean, so I'm not coming with a lot of the baggage in that sense, and I get that. It's funny though, coming to a strong view later on in this process. I already think Bitcoin is established. It's already, it's super legitimate from my perspective. So when you have the confidence of something that's already won, you don't even need to bother with the rest of, like, beating up on the little guy. They've won. This is it. The Bitcoin has, and I think some of the narrative, for instance, we were talking before about Safedine Amos's book, The Bitcoin Standard. I think the narrative that comes out of that book is really interesting, and I think has started to. I don't know, 5 years ago, that wasn't the narrative that I understood.
Mm-hmm. Right. I love that Safe didn't really focus on Bitcoin at all till the end of the book, and for a very little section of the book. It was more about monetary history. And that's the mission of this podcast, is to help people realize that we live in an anomaly of monetary history, and things may be hitting ahead and that's one thing I think our society today, with all the technology, just the pace of change that we're experiencing as a human species, it's hard for people to take a step back and put our current condition in the context of a bigger history. And I think that's maybe the folly of our modern day right now, especially with monetary economics.
Yeah, and it's complicated, and Bitcoin is certainly the most complicated, or the most complex, let's just say, thing that I've probably ever had to analyze.
Really?
Yeah, by far. Just because it's so interdisciplinary, and you have to push through in the beginning not understanding a lot of things. I mean, even if you're reading Antonopoulos' book, The Internet of the Internet Money, that volume 2, it's super enlightening, but there are big chunks of it that you're not going to get if you're just new to it. And I like this I said on Twitter, I like this Jan Pritzker book. I think
Inventing Bitcoin.
Yeah, Inventing Bitcoin. I suggest that as a starter, but even as a starter, it's, there are lots of concepts in there that are going to be hard for people, especially around the mining process, the actual, the verification process. That, when you get into the weeds, can be more complicated than you'd think.
Well, it actually brings up an An interesting topic we can dive on. You mentioned earlier putting Bitcoin in cold storage. I'm very happy you said that. As somebody, a 28-year-old Bitcoiner, it's one of the biggest worries is UX, especially with the custody of private keys, will be such that most people leave their coins on exchanges, especially in older generations. But as we have a demographic shift here too, like, do you notice your kids' generation or generations behind them getting this more innately and speeding up the process over like, it actually just hit me a couple weeks ago that Gen Z is entering the workforce now, which blows my mind. All the 23-year-olds graduating and going into college are technically Gen Z, not millennials anymore.
Yeah, but you know what? So I have 3 kids. One's 19, 17, and 15. And they, until I engagement, they didn't know what Bitcoin was.
Really?
So it's not, the education, and they'd heard about it, but they just had no idea. And at school, there isn't a lot of discussion about it. I'm trying to encourage one of my kids to start a club, and I could have, certainly some well-known speakers come to the school and talk about it, and we might do that. But there isn't any formal way. So I made my son, we're now at a place where we understand it and we own some, they do, so that they can get used to it and maybe following it and reading news about it. But it's not coming from, the peer group. On the other hand, there are some kids. My son does have a friend who is really very hardcore in his I guess he's 18, but he's a computer science major, and he's hardcore into Bitcoin. But what I'm saying is that don't think that there's a natural adoption just because they're younger. One of my kids said, I said, "Oh, what about Bitcoin?" And one of them said, "Oh, wait, isn't that that's what the kids use to buy their fake IDs?"
That's what my sister did. Yes.
So that's it.
Yeah.
And then it stops there. Mm-hmm. So, that's not good in a way. That's not, that continues the narrative that actually Bitcoin has conquered, which is that it's illegitimate, right? Bitcoin isn't anything but illegitimate. And so yet here we have these 16 and 17-year-olds, again, not understanding that it's a network that's been built and has incredible security characteristics, and one day will be the rails for all the payment systems globally. So that's important, and I think education and getting that message out to the younger ones who are all digital native, they'll be able to get this, but it's got to get out there a little bit. Yeah. So, and as we know, Bitcoin has no marketing department, and Bitcoin has, and a lot of people say, well, who cares? The ones that the ones that will say, well, who cares about it? Who cares about all that? It'll just happen. And that's probably right. But what I've realized being in markets all these years is that nothing ever really has to happen. There is a path where it doesn't happen. Now, that's not my view, and I think it's a low probability, and I think the way we increase the odds that it does happen is by doing things, like encouraging our kids to understand it and follow it. And through that, they can then understand about monetary affairs, global monetary affairs within that context. So they'll start with Bitcoin and then the other way, as opposed to, a guy like me, I started from, traditional macro. So that would be interesting if they learned about the world through Bitcoin first, right?
And we can only hope. Well, that actually brings up a good segue. So how much of a black swan is Bitcoin on the international payments and money settlement layer, especially if you...
Well, what do you mean by black swan?
So especially if you're talking about Russia and China stockpiling gold for the last 2 decades like crazy. Maybe they had an idea that they were going to do a decades-long attack on the U.S. as the reserve currency, and while doing that, they did stockpile gold, and Bitcoin comes out of nowhere and sort of blows up that plan.
I think that's all very sort of theoretical stuff, because I mean, yes, they've been accumulating gold, but to no specific effect. I don't see. Maybe there's a very slow erosion in the dollar's hegemony, but they could stockpile gold for the next 20 years, not necessarily change anything. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, it wasn't the best example. So just in terms of being able to control the system and not focusing on China and Russia in particular, just maybe the U.S. in particular. So recently, rumors have been coming out that Maduro has been buying goods directly with Bitcoin due to sanctions, can't buy with U.S. dollar or other currencies, so he's been forced to use Bitcoin. So on the geopolitical stage, it seems like a lot of assumptions that could fit into models a decade ago sort of have to be reworked and rethought about.
So you're saying to what degree can Bitcoin disrupt the existing system?
Yes.
And I think it is. It doesn't have to be in a bad way. And there are tremendous inefficiencies within the global monetary system. And so even this very simple concept of store of value, and this is, again, Dalio sort of gets into this, and all the Bitcoiners are like, Ray, Bitcoin solves this. I do think that, I do think that you could have a period now over the next, just let's say 10 years, where I don't think fiat, as now comfortably talks about fiat, goes away. Okay. I think there's these things happen a little more slowly. I mean, there's a transition. It could be like in the old days where you have all these different currencies trading around Bitcoin. Bitcoin is in the center, and then everyone's value is versus Bitcoin, right? So you could have those pairs trading a lot.
Yeah.
I could see that.
Would that be Nash's equilibrium?
I'm sorry?
Would that be Nash's dream of the equilibrium currency? I'm not sure. No, I could totally see that. And benchmarking their currencies against Bitcoin as a transitionary period. Stable coins are a good example of that as well.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, and this is where Libra or Calibra can come in. And there's lots of debate about this, but I mean, you've signed up, that's, as everyone says, that's 2 billion people. They could very easily introduce Bitcoin into that ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And every person who has never heard of it, and there still are people who've never heard of Bitcoin, or who don't know how to use it, or whatever it is, if all of a sudden they have access to it, it's a big deal.
Right.
And, the characteristics of Bitcoin, the store of value, versus the other currencies as a store of value, is something I think that will catch on. The next piece of it, though, for me, and I say this often, is that if Bitcoin is 20 things, one of them is a store of value. But Bitcoin is so much bigger than that, and that's when you start thinking about the programmable aspects and all these other problems that it can solve. You start to think, you get into the super hyperbole of it can go to $1 million, or it can go to 200,000.
Have you met Bitcoin Tina?
What's that? Right, Bitcoin Tina. But it's not just that. It's even guys who are, who have, as I've mentioned before, Tim Draper and Winklevoss brothers. They've been talking about 200,000, 500,000 Bitcoin for quite a while, and that doesn't do it any service, because people then back away from it. So I try not to get into that hyperbole, but the truth of it is that there's this narrative that it's digital gold, right? But again, that's only one aspect of Bitcoin. That's not leveraging the insane security aspect of it, right? And that, in theory, could be worth as much as the sovereign value aspect, right?
How much have you How long of a trip have you taken down the Bitcoin can make us more energy efficient rabbit hole?
I mean, it's not impossible.
Well-
It's not. I mean, you have to extrapolate things out. But I also like the rabbit hole that I like a little more is, the one that says that somehow the U.S. figures out that the entire Bitcoin ecosystem can bring tremendous value and growth in GDP and employment, and it just could be a super boon for the country. And some people were like, well, that's legacy thinking, countries, we're not going to have countries. And anyway, the point is, I live here, and I think America is a pretty good place, and I like to see people who aren't doing well do better. And if I were, in D.C., I would be trying to think of ways, how do we get the entire Bitcoin world, but the ecosystem here? And mining is a perfect example, right? We've got lots of resources here in this
trap
country.
gas. Dan,
right?
I've got the pitch for you.
Exactly.
I've got the pitch in DC. There's a lot of flack out there about global warming. It's a big topic out there. We're wasting a lot of vented gas in these basins that could be captured and mined for Bitcoin.
And
just putting it out there.
And tons of renewable possibilities.
Yeah. Oh, and renew. So we're getting all the hydroelectric, the geothermal too, and the fact that we're finally going out and consuming these resources means that we'll be tinkering around with them and innovating around with them, which is naturally good. And then natural gas and oil, their problem is transportation. They can't transport the supply from the basins to the cities. They can't build the pipes. And it's a lot better when your pipes go from hundreds of miles to feet on site. And
look,
Bitcoin
Canada should today be a Bitcoin powerhouse with all that hydro power up there.
Quebec messed it up. They kicked all the Bitcoiners out.
Yeah, but they can change their mind. Also, I wouldn't rule them out of the game just yet. It takes some time for people to see the value. So I like going down that rabbit hole. People think, Bitcoin's no good because it's all in China. I'm like, well, it's not going to be all in China within 5 to 7 years.
No,
it's not going to be that way.
We should start a Dan Tapiero, Marty Bent campaign to get DC to incentivize oil and gas producers to mine Bitcoin with their flared gas. If you get a certain amount of your vented gas that would have otherwise been vented and you mine Bitcoin with it instead, you get a tax break. I think we can do this.
Well, I almost have a better idea, which is just to maybe just go out and do it.
Oh.
Right? So, there are some projects that I'm looking at right now.
Yeah. I can guarantee you it's happening. It's
it's all good.
Yeah.
Right?
And and that's the crazy thing. Again, going back to how geopolitical it gets, like China has owned the mining for the first decade, for most of the first decade. It seems to be getting more distributed now, but could it become a national security risk in the long run, do you think, if we don't get on top of this?
I think it's moving away from that, and so I think that's yesterday's narrative.
Really? Why?
Because I think that it will become much more decentralized. I think there will be places in the next 5 years where it will be cheaper to secure the network, because that's what's going on, right? We're just securing the network.
Yeah. Securing the network, batching transactions and not wasting energy, which is something, and again, it's something that naturally people in this country should be getting behind now, especially with all the climate change stuff. We want to be as efficient as possible, and then become as efficient as possible as we can on the planet. Then we move to the stars. We take this to space. This is something else that you were tweeting about the other week. Is China going to beat us to space?
Look, that tweet. I was just what blew me away is the Chinese ability to just plan not just so far into the future, but like into totally abstract, esoteric things. To plan what was it? A
space land, like
a space colony or space commercialization of, it was like a free trade zone in space. I mean, they still have 500 million people living on, $50 a year. Vast underclass in China, and yet still, and again, a huge middle class now too. But they're having plans like this, and it's interesting. I don't know. It's probably on a 50-year view, it's probably the right thing to do, but it's in just stark contrast to what goes on here, and I think that's what struck me about that story and why I retweeted it and wrote that comment, because we really could use a bit of
A space race?
more long-term planning.
Yeah.
And, in a way, and I think Dan said this at the Pantera conference, Dan Moorhead, that, this is a Sputnik moment for us in Bitcoin, meaning, China does a lot of the mining. They've just talked about a stable coin. The central bank did.
BCEP or something like that.
Right, that's exactly right. And so where are we in all this? Why is it that, why are we behind them, especially with so much talent here? And not just in the valley, but, you're getting all sorts of different places are popping up as, I don't want to call them Bitcoin hubs, but now you go into New York and you go down to the Flatiron, that whole area, lots of Bitcoiners down there.
Austin's got a great scene.
Yep.
All over the place. LA's got a scene now. Mm-hmm.
Right. So it just, unfortunately, it's just taking a little longer. Maybe it's also because the Chinese tend to be super facile with technology and computing and video games and math. And, you have Alipay over there and everyone uses it. All the cabs in, I think it's Shanghai, they're all, you can't pay cash anymore.
It's Alipay or WeChat, right?
Right, yeah. And so, the U.S. is a democracy and is more fractured, and it takes time for things to catch hold here. But it's going to happen. It's going to happen. So I'm saying, that story about space, it would be nice if we had somebody with some vision and a little bit of a long-term plan. Yeah.
I mean, it feels like here in America, we're just stuck in these 2-year election cycles. You go from the midterms to the presidential elections, and it's just people screaming back and forth. And honestly, Obamacare was the last big, altruistic effort I can think of, but it doesn't seem like we're thinking big right now in America in particular.
No, and I'm not thinking that we should be thinking like
Obamacare.
No,
Neither am I.
okay.
But just as an example,
that was
the
a
last
big project. But
Yeah.
I mean, no, not. But you're right. We've been able to get around that, but usually, the historians would say that the U.S. really only is galvanized when there's an external threat or people come together, or when a threat or there's something bigger going on. But I think that's why calling it the U.S.'s Sputnik moment is pretty. That wasn't a specific external threat, but it sort of was, right? Like the next step after them getting to being in space is dropping bombs, and I don't think we're there. Meaning that the result of being behind in Bitcoin is not that we're going to get bombed.
No.
But I think, if you can get people to believe that we're losing a hold of part of the future and people's quality of lives and the quality of life of our kids is going to be reduced because we're not adopting new technologies that are right in front of us. Because we're not doing the work. This is one thing where it's very, very clear. I'm talking about Bitcoin, that it is very hard to do the work. You need to take the time. You need to dive in and do it, and to read thoroughly. And this is not. You can't just figure this out in a 30-minute, blurb, and Americans' attention span is pretty small, and I don't know how it improves. But I'll tell you something: there are a lot of guys in this space in their 20s who are super bright and really like thinkers, not just math and programmer types. I mean, real big picture thinkers. Reminds me a little bit of, some of the talent that was in Wall Street in the late 80s and 90s, and in my business 90s, 2000s, where you really had the smartest guys coming out of whatever schools, wanting to just figure things out, and looking around and seeing where the biggest opportunity was. And I think that this group of 20-year-olds, meaning their attention span, it's there. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's there. Just we have to somehow
harness that energy.
Yeah, you got to harness it. And maybe it's that what the Bitcoin people say, that price go up, right? That encourages more people, and I think that's part of it. But the price is up 300% annualized for 10 years, and we're not quite where I think we could be.
Well, that's because
so it's more than that.
Yeah, and I think it's beyond like the interdisciplinary nature and having to put the time in. People don't understand. Well, maybe you can't understand the gravity of it until you put the time in. So, but it's ironic that here in America, in particular, people aren't big on Bitcoin. Considering, I would consider it's probably one of the Bitcoin source code is very analogous to the Declaration of Independence in a way, and it's very American.
Well, I mean, the white paper was in English. It wasn't in whatever Russian, right?
Yeah, and it vibes with Americans' values of freedom and liberty.
It really does. It really does, especially in the middle of the country. Maybe not so much on the coasts and in some of the cities, but it really is American. That independence, that free spirit, that belief in, that there is some truth, that it's not corruptible. That, I mean, these are things that the founders all had innately in them.
Yeah.
The move away from, centralized corruption, if you think about it, was imbued in the king, right? There can't be any more a centralized, political. Maybe there is, but I'm just saying that, the rejection of that. Mm-hmm. Talk about that legacy system, right? We rejected that.
Yes.
And, I think the crisis in '08 and some of the developments in the last 15 years maybe lay the groundwork for this. It's almost like possible for like an intellectual renaissance.
Yeah.
It could be American Renaissance. Like, just as Ray thinks it's the end of the world and all these guys are gloom and doom and Bitcoin is a fraud, but really the ideology behind it is a very positive one.
I agree 100%. Shout out to Neil Woodfine, who one of my favorite Bitcoin tweets of all time is Bitcoin, if successful, will bring about the next renaissance, because you have to learn about so much stuff and forced to think critically about the system with which you live under.
So that's very important. Critical thinking. The high school I went to was very. Really, that was the most important thing coming out of that place. Not being some sort of ideologue, understanding both sides in a deep way. Staking out your position based on, having gone through the arguments, careful, thoughtful contemplation about both, discussion around a round table, which is what we had, 8-10 kids talking back and forth, vetting your ideas. Some people might say, oh, well, that's old-fashioned and, Platonic or whatever it is. But to be honest, that is sort of what's going on in Twitter. And you have people around certain concepts, certain threads, certain themes, and you have a lot of people chiming in, and the guys who are kind of like off their rocker, I think get pushed out a little bit. I mean, at least, or you just block them, right? That's how you, or it's.
I have a mute policy. If you come in my mentions too many times, not making sense, you get muted.
Yeah, and I think someone who's too emotional about what should not be, if you're trying to have a concerted discussion to understand something, you don't need like a ton of, crazy, excessive emotion in it. You can have enthusiasm. So it's interesting. I think the Twitter is an unbelievably powerful tool. I don't know if it's necessarily an invention, but it's
like the bars during the Revolution. It's where people
go
to
or those
meet,
those old taverns.
Yeah.
You're talking about those old taverns where they used to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think it is funny that people would call out a Socratic debate in this form. It's too antiquated. It's too old. This style of debate exists and has been taught throughout millennia for a reason. It's the way to think logically to get down to the essence of truth at the end of the day, which is what we're all striving for.
And there are lots of nuggets, truth nuggets, on Twitter. And again, people have said to me, my older guys, like, Dan, how do you follow all of that? I'm like, well, you don't. And, there are days where I'm too busy and you don't check in. But then, there are periods of time where you're in a car for an hour and, you're looking, you have some time on your hands, or you're reading you're trying to find out about some piece of news and it leads to, a thread that's interesting. It's amazingly powerful. And I think even when I mentioned to some people, I didn't do anything on Twitter before the Raoul interview. Yeah, zero. And then there are all these people asking me questions, and then I thought, hey, let's try this. This is kind of neat. Every day we'll post one thing or two things on macro or gold or Bitcoin or just interesting things. And I found it absolutely phenomenal. The quality and level of intelligence and debate. Most of my peers think it's just nonsense. You
have to filter. I've been filtering a list for 5 years now. It takes Twitter doesn't make it easy either.
But there are a few hundred people who are real and thoughtful, and I don't know what the number is, but I'm just thinking that who are consistently, and everyone knows who they are, right? Because when they post things, they're interesting, and you tend to read them. So that does take time.
And Bitcoiners are good at taking things viral too. They really like to pump good news about Bitcoin.
Look, that's great, and pomp I think is great, and and on the more fun side, I love that that guy who dresses up in a spacesuit and sings those songs.
What's his name?
How funny is that? That's great.
A little crypto or something.
Right? My gosh. So, it's a real living, breathing community.
And it's becoming ingrained in our culture overall as a society, right? Bitcoin.
You mean Twitter or
Bitcoin?
Well, Bitcoin. I don't know about that. I think maybe in the world, in the small world that you're inhabiting, but in my world up in Greenwich, it's not ingrained anywhere. It's not. No one. It's more of a sort of old school type of. There's no adoption.
If you ever need somebody to come help you get people to adopt up there, let me know. Come pitch.
Yeah, what out on the golf course, you have a host of Bitcoin study and teaching. I think it'll come naturally, mm-hmm. And the more people who the early guys from MySpace. the global macro investment world. So we're talking, Dan Moorhead and Mike Novogratz and John Burbank and Pete Brigger. I mean, those guys do a lot for the space in terms of having a little bit of an outside view on it. But that's just a handful of guys around my age. The guys who are older are not really they can't, they're not there. And I think we don't really have, I mean, there's been some floating over from the traditional financial world, but it's still not super duper high profile people that are saying this is the future.
Yeah. It'll take some time, but and I guess we can end it on this. Like, it seems almost natural, though, right? The way things have played out the last 3 decades, in particular, with the emergence of the internet, and the emergence of social media, and this sort of digital layer that we're building on top of Earth. It seems that it's only natural there will be a digital monetary good too going forward. At least in my mind. I don't know if you share that same view.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's we all need to do whatever, contribute in the way that we think is best, because this is a good, right? It's a natural, what I would call a natural good.
Yeah. And this conversation has been very good. I really appreciate you making the trip.
Yeah, it's been fun. No problem.
Thank you.
No problem. Nice to do it.
Thank you for coming over. I really appreciate you taking the trip, your
great.
Insights. We can find you on Twitter at DTAPCap.
Yes. Yes. Still not quite. Yeah. Yes.
I like that. All caps.
Well, that's
DTAPCap.
the name of the firm. Yeah.
It's easy to remember. It's easy to remember. At DTAPCap. Dan, really appreciate your time. Thank you for doing what you're doing, spreading the word to Bitcoin.
And I'll be getting more involved in this space now, and I have some projects that I'm engaged with and about to engage with. So, but nothing to discuss at this time. But
well, if you ever want to come back and discuss, let me know. We're here.
Okay.
The invite is open.
Yep. Thank you very much.
That's all we got this week, freaks. Peace and love. Take care.